Hi, I'm Scoot on the air, and tonight we're going to do the real story of Elvis Presley. What I've been doing here, among other things, on the Scoot on the Air YouTube channel, is something that I've been doing on my radio show on WWL, and that is share some of the backstories of interesting things that have happened. And I've just started this. So the first one that I did was the real story behind the murder of Marvin Gaye. Now, Marvin Gaye was murdered by his dad a day before his birthday in the family home. I mean, there had to be a story there. And while I knew about this, I looked into it a little further. And it was a fascinating story. And so I have done some things on that. Last week, I talked about the reasons that many believe Kurt Cobain was murdered and it wasn't suicide. And today, I want to do the real story of Elvis. Now, Elvis Presley was very early in his career a certified rock star. Elvis Presley, even though, he had this thing about gyrating his hips, and it was considered so sexual in the 1950s. This was considered so sexual that the networks refused to show Elvis from the waist down. They only showed him from the waist up because his gyrating hips when he danced was considered so sexual, couldn't be shown on network television. How things have changed, right? In 1956, with the release of Heartbreak Hotel, by this time, shortly after this, and by this time, and then of course shortly after this, Elvis Presley was a certified superstar. 2 years later, Elvis was drafted into the military. Now, Elvis, aside from the drug use, Elvis, and this wasn't even known early in his career, but Elvis was considered a pretty clean-cut, good old country boy. He was born in Tupelo, Mississippi. He chose to live in Memphis, Tennessee, bought Graceland with cash, $100,000 in cash. I don't know. I think he was maybe 21. But anyway, Elvis was drafted in 1958 into the Army. And he enlisted into the Army. He was drafted. So he enlisted into the Army. And Elvis went in, and he did not use his money. He didn't use his fame. He didn't use his status to get out of the draft. He enlisted in the Army. Elvis wanted to prove that he wasn't better than anybody else. And he never used his celebrity status when he was in the Army. He did the jobs that everybody else did. And I guess the first thing to go was that big pompadour hairdo. His head was shaved, just like everybody else. Elvis was stationed in Germany in October of 1958. In less than a year, in September of 1959, Elvis met a young girl named Priscilla at a party that was at his house. Now, Priscilla, the man that she knew as her father, Paul Beaulieu, I think is how I pronounce his name, he was an officer in the Air Force. And so he's invited to this party at Elvis's, and he brings Priscilla with him. Now, Priscilla later learned that that was not her biological dad. Her real dad was a Navy pilot who was killed when she was 6 months old. So here's Elvis meeting Priscilla at this party at his house in Germany, or wherever it was that he lived. He is immediately infatuated with her. She had friends who loved Elvis. She thought he was gross. But when she met him, she was somehow awestruck. She was very infatuated with Elvis. Now, Elvis took her out, and her parents were okay with this. But they weren't happy when he brought her home very, very late. By the way, Elvis was 24. Priscilla was 14. She was in the 9th grade. It was reported that Elvis and Priscilla didn't have sex until they were married in 1967. But there's evidence that they played games and that they were sexual. One of the games that they apparently played was the teacher seduces the student. And I guess Priscilla had a lot of wardrobe clothing to go along with her role as the student because she was a student. Um, she had reached a point where she wanted to have sex with Elvis, but Elvis said, "You're too young." Now, what's pretty interesting about all of this is Elvis, while he was maybe just playing around with Priscilla, making out and just playing around with her, Elvis was having sex with women, including Nancy Sinatra and Anne Margaret, who was his co-star in Viva Las Vegas. Elvis finally proposed to Priscilla on a Christmas Day, 1966. And there were rumors that Elvis didn't really want to marry her, that he was pressured to marry her by her and her dad. Priscilla's dad threatened to take criminal action against Elvis because he had taken his daughter across state lines as a minor. And Priscilla apparently threatened to reveal to the media details of their relationship when she was a teenager. So apparently there was some sexual stuff going on there. So being afraid that this would all be exposed, because Elvis was with Priscilla for a long time, and we didn't know about it. The public didn't know. This was all kept very quiet because Elvis was afraid it would destroy his image. And it might have hurt his image even back then. But I mean, today, it seems like Elvis would be considered a pedophile. You know, you're like hanging out and doing stuff with a 14-year-old girl. Some of it is obviously sexual. Now, Priscilla moved to Los Angeles. Elvis convinced her parents to let her move to Los Angeles. So she moves to Los Angeles to be with Elvis. He enrolls her in school. I mean, that's kind of weird, right? Your boyfriend enrolls you in school? Kind of strange. She really couldn't keep up with Elvis. She couldn't keep up with school. She was falling behind. So Elvis started to give her amphetamines. And then she needed sleeping pills to sleep at night. And she continued to try to keep up with him, and his, career kept him up very late at night, and her as well. After Elvis died, Priscilla was more open about the darker side of Elvis. She said that he was extremely obsessive. He would tell her exactly what to wear. He would tell her to wear a lot of makeup. In fact, Priscilla said Elvis never saw her without makeup. And he never saw her putting on makeup. I mean, if you're a woman, that had to be really quite a stressful thing. I mean, to have to have makeup on all the time, and your husband, boyfriend can't see you without makeup. I mean, that had to be really, really difficult. And look, she looked like a beautiful woman to me. Elvis was also paranoid about her getting older, and sometimes would even smack her on the forehead if she frowned, saying, "If you keep frowning, you're going to get wrinkles on your forehead." Elvis demanded that Priscilla like the same things that he liked. Very, very controlling. And she essentially had no life beyond Elvis's control. Now, Elvis was fascinated with guns. He had a .357 Magnum. And Priscilla said that sometimes, if something upset him on television, he would take out the gun and fire it in the direction of the TV while sitting at home. I mean, that had to be kind of scary. Elvis and Priscilla were married in 1967. And Priscilla got pregnant immediately. In fact, the wedding, I think this might have been an indication that Elvis really wasn't that serious about getting married. The press was waiting for this big, spectacular wedding. The wedding took place at the Aladdin Hotel in Las Vegas. And the ceremony lasted 8 minutes. Then it was over. So here they are married in 1967. Priscilla gets pregnant right away. 9 months after they're married, Lisa Marie is born. And Elvis seemed to love her, but Elvis was always concerned that being married and having a child would hurt his image as a heartthrob. So even though he wasn't even totally sexually active with Priscilla all the time, he was sexually active with other women. And Priscilla knew about this and she wasn't happy. And she was feeling desperately alone. Elvis had recommended that she take karate lessons, not only because he was into karate and he wanted her to like the things that he liked, but also because he thought it would help fill her life with something. So she takes karate from an instructor named Kylie Stone. Well, at some point, they find themselves attracted to each other and they have sex. But it isn't long before it turns into a full blown affair. And from what I'm understanding, Elvis learned about this and was not happy at all. So Priscilla and Elvis were divorced in 1973. And after they were divorced, it is reported that Elvis tried to hire a hitman to kill Kylie Stone, the instructor that she had an affair with. And a friend of his talked him out of following through with it. So it didn't happen. 4 years after they were divorced, Elvis died. In fact, after he was divorced, he was constantly in and out of the hospital. His health was deteriorating rapidly. He was getting extremely fat, still taking a lot of pills. But 4 years after the divorce, he died, and even at that point, after all that she'd been through with the king of rock and roll, Priscilla still said Elvis was the love of her life. She also talked about a vulnerable Elvis, that Elvis was very much a loner, didn't have many friends. And she often thought that one of her duties as his wife was to provide a shoulder for him to cry on. When Elvis died, Priscilla inherited Graceland and a lot of other things. She established the Elvis Presley Enterprise. And today she's worth about $50 million. So she went on to remarry, had another child, but she is alone today. And I just, just in looking into the story of Elvis, and I mean, I knew that he met Priscilla at a really early age, but what I didn't know is that he was so controlling. What I didn't know is that they had some kind of a relationship from the time she was 14 on. And all of this was kept a secret. Now, her parents were not happy with this in the beginning, but Elvis somehow charmed his way back into their life. And as mad as they were that Elvis had kept her out really late, as a 14-year-old, had kept her out really late, the first night, he charmed his way back in and said he loves her. And anyway, they let the relationship continue. So I just thought that was an interesting little backdrop for the person who is still known as the king of rock and roll, Elvis Presley. And, he continued to give her amphetamines over the years and pills and, God knows what else. But, in a way, it's a sad story. This revelation about Elvis, kind of being a pedophile is disturbing. But his story is a sad story. And I remember when I visited Graceland in Memphis, and I'd gone through the house. I was going through the house, and by the time I got to his grave, I started thinking that nobody could really have dealt with that life and remain sane. Elvis died at 43. He was an instant star. Just think about how popular he was. I mean, if you're a millennial, Gen Xer, Zoomer, I know you can't relate to what it would be like for Elvis to be a star. I was a kid, so I remember when Elvis, had records on the radio, I was never a big fan. I was a big Beatles fan. Elvis was a little bit before my time, but especially over the years of being in radio for so long, I knew how popular he was. I knew what a megastar he was. I mean, even if you didn't like his music, even if you didn't listen to his music, you knew what a big star Elvis was. And this happened like right away. I mean, 1956 Heartbreak Hotel. I mean, things skyrocketed for him, and he was in movie after movie after movie after movie. I think all of the songs were the same. They just changed the title of the songs and the titles of the movie. But he became so famous so fast, and he was um, so revered as this. Well, he was Elvis, and I don't know if anybody really could have dealt with that life in the long run. It would have taken just a really incredible person to do that. And I think the same is true of Michael Jackson. Think about Michael Jackson becoming a star so early in his life, and his life ended before it should have. But when you think about all that he dealt with and all that he represented and the pressure that was on him, I don't know that anybody like that could ever be expected to lead a normal life. We appreciate them for their entertainment, but we have to empathize with them when it comes to what they had to deal with. But those were lives that they chose. In some ways, they chose the life. Those lives also chose them. Anyway, I'm Scoot. Thank you for joining me here on my YouTube channel, Scoot on the Air, and I enjoyed sharing this story with you. And we'll do another one next week. Now, I'm going to be on YouTube on a regular basis, and every night, Monday through Friday. And join me on my radio show on WWL, 870 AM, 105.3 FM in New Orleans and the Gulf South. But you can download the app Odyssey, Audacy. Download the app Odyssey and type in WWL. And you've got our show 1 to 4 in the afternoon, Central Time, Monday through Friday, wherever you have your phone. And we have a lot of fun. It's politics, pop culture, and your opinions. And sometimes it gets a little on the passionate side. And sometimes people disagree with me. But it's cool. I hope you enjoyed this little backstory with Elvis Presley, and we will have another backstory, a real story behind somebody else coming up next week.